podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, and welcome to episode 2 of EPL Market Matrix. Last week, we were looking at the Eastern European market, and this week, ladies and gents, it's time to step foot in a winger Wonderland. So we'll be reviewing the wingers that are hot on the block. We'll be looking at the latest stories. And most importantly, people will be looking at that metric base. Do they match up? Could there be something in it? And here, same as last week, I'm delighted to be joined by the man himself, Ben Bocsak. Ben, looking forward to this one. I know you like a winger.
Yeah, I think I'm excited to talk about some of these players because some of them have been on my radar for a long time. Others, not so much, but I think they've been on everyone else's radar for a long time. So it's going to be sort of interesting to analyse them and see where they could end up, what's the best fit for them, because I think there's a lot of possibilities for all the players that we're going to talk about. There's no set team for any of them, so it's going to be interesting to see what happens with all of them this summer.
Yeah, all of their names have been mentioned. Will all of them move? That's a different story. Like last week, we talked about Benjamin Sesko. We actually both said his best option would be to stick in Leipzig and continue his career. And obviously, Benjamin was listening because we know he signed that extension till 2029 the other day. So, where should we start, Ben? There's only one place. Probably, I'd say, the strongest linked winger, especially at the moment, the stories. No one can escape a day without something around Michael Olise. Crystal Palace winger, I'm sure you know, people. Left-footed right winger, essentially. Can play across the line, but that's his main position, as it's been under Glasner and Hodgson this season. 22 years old, Ben. French international, not selected for the Euros, which should really diminish him in any way, because they've just got unbelievable forwards. All you need to do is take one look at the squad that way. But this is probably the name. You fancy a lot of clubs like him, a lot of clubs are rumoured with him. It's fair to say Chelsea and United are the two main ones, and even there was a Give Me Sport article that Chelsea were close to agreeing terms with him. They nearly got him last summer, but he signed the new contract, so it'll be interesting to see. A lot of clubs like this player. A lot of fans, I think it's safe to say, who follow football like this player for their team, especially as well. You know, at United, Chelsea, even the likes of Liverpool fans have been quoting him. Is the hype real around Olise? Do the stats match up to the hype for you?
Well, we've got to be cautious because it is a small sample size, but certainly based on his numbers, I think, yeah, the hype is definitely warranted. I think if you're looking at sort of wingers in the Premier League for pure output, so goals per 90, only Cole Palmer and Diego Jota have averaged more goals per 90 out of wingers in the Premier League than Olise. Than out of wingers in the Premier League. For expected assists per 90, only Leon Bailey has averaged more than Olise. So, you know, his output is really good. He's up there with the best sort of players, those metrics. And I think the other thing as well, you know, he's full of flair. He's got that ability 1v1 that is very rare, I think, in the Premier League to do it really well and really regularly. There's only a few players, and those few players will be really sort of hyped players. Like, I think Mitoma, the season before last season, obviously he was the talk of the town because of his 1v1.
Yeah.
And I think Olise is that kind of player. So I was looking at wingers who average at least 8 dribbles per 90. Out of those wingers, he has the best completion rate, over 65%, which is a really high completion rate for that volume of dribbles as well. That's higher than, for example, someone like Jeremy Doku. Obviously, everyone knows for his 1v1 ability. And I think that's something that maybe doesn't get mentioned about Olise as much as maybe his output, but it's also really impressive, and that gives him an extra sort of layer and an extra sort of factor as to why he is so hyped by everyone and why everyone wants him, really.
It's an interesting one. I mean, like you say, he's 10 goals and 6 assists in less than 1,300 minutes. I mean, the ratio, as you say, the goals to assist per minute is incredible for a young winger. The one thing I did, or a couple of things I should say, I wanted to ask about. Chelsea United seemed to be the biggest one link, and you mentioned a name there as well, Cole Palmer. When we look at the Chelsea link, do you not think, does it spring to mind, like, hold on, they've got Cole Palmer that they usually play in that right wing, like, could they move him? Could they move Olise? Again, the element of why do Chelsea always sign wide-based attackers instead of an actual striker? And then you look at United and think, well, they've had nightmares galore, haven't they, with their wingers? Anthony's not been up to scratch. Garnacho plays on the left, so he's up. When you steer into it, do you think more United than Chelsea? Or is that too simple?
I think not necessarily, because obviously the system is changing at Chelsea. Pochettino is leaving, Enzo Maresca is coming in, and actually I think Maresca last season at Leicester used a very similar sort of profile of on the right wing for Leicester in Abdul Fattah, who's again high output in terms of chance creation and goals scored as well. Well, not so much goals scored, but he was getting opportunities and stuff, and he also averaged a high volume of dribbles too. So very sort of similar profile to Olise, and I think that lends credence to maybe that Chelsea move, because I think Cole Palmer is someone who can play maybe in other positions. I could see him potentially even playing as a false 9 or as a number 10 type of player, depending on how Maresca wants to set Chelsea up. So I don't think it's set in stone. Certainly, I think United makes slightly bit more sense there, because there's going to be less competition there. But I think with Chelsea, there's competition everywhere now. It's so it's not like if that was just the only choice between the two, then obviously United would be the obvious, because he's guaranteed more minutes. But I think it's more nuanced than that, and I think the new manager coming in at Chelsea does add sort of an extra bit of chance for this move for Chelsea to put it off. And on top of that, the fact that they are someone who've been following him for a long time, and obviously I think the fact that they're sort of London based, that's where Olise grew up. He came through at Reading's academy, obviously at Crystal Palace now, all sort of in and around the area of London. I think that might give Chelsea the advantage, but I can see him doing, being a good move for at United as well. Although I think maybe that Jadon Sancho example might be a little bit off-putting, because I see Olise as actually being a very sort of similar player to Sancho, just on the right side. So having seen him struggle, I wonder, does that sort of put him off of moving to United?
Yeah, it will be an interesting one. They are the two that are linked most predominantly at the moment. And the other question around Olise, Ben, injuries. Now, it depends how you want to look at this, I think, and it'll be an interesting one to speak about, because it would be a lie to say he hasn't got that injury history this season. That would be a false statement, but it's not simple just to say he's injury prone, isn't it, this season as well? That seems a bit too simplistic at the same time.
Absolutely. I mean, before that, his injury record was pretty crystal clear. Like, we didn't seem to have any issues. So I think to isolate one season and label him as injury prone based on this season alone, where I think he was sort of maybe perhaps a little bit mismanaged, I think that would be a little bit too simplistic. So for me, I think there is a question mark, but it's not necessarily a red flag when it comes to him.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. I think probably it's the way I'd phrase it when you look back. The timings, the way Roy Hodgson even talked about, was he rushed back at times last season. So yeah, I think that's where most people should label it under. And I suppose the final question, because he's hitting a lot of the metrics, there's a lot to like, we're not labeling him as injury prone at all. I mean, there's nothing definite, and you can't, there's no one unequivocally said Michael Olise's release clause is 65 million, but that's the suggestions around that mark, isn't it? 60 to 65 million. A lot of the outlets have it at that. A lot of the outlets also, though, have said it can only be triggered by certain clubs, which is interesting because when you do a bit of trawling, some have said Champions League clubs. I was like, well, that's neither United nor Chelsea, so we'll see on that. But at a fee of 60 to 65 million, would you expect Olise to move on this summer? Do you think this will be the year, having renewed last year when there was interest? This could be the year.
I think, yeah, in some ways, you got to say with the amount of interest in him, this has got to be the year to sort of move on. I think even though he hasn't had the most amount of minutes, I think it was clear towards the end of last season that he was sort of Palace's standout player, and I think he's proven that this season as well, with limited amounts of minutes. So 100%, I think this is the sort of time for him now to move to the next step and move up the ladder.
Yeah, I think it'll be a lot of surprise this summer if we don't see by the end at least an offer or serious talks with clubs, wouldn't there, that for Olise? Yeah, then there's a lot of clubs have him on his radar, no doubts about it. Brill. So that is Michael Olise covered. And Palace fans, before you start hating us, this is just discussing headlines, what we've heard and what we're seeing. So the next one, and not quite an out-and-out winger, I do appreciate, has played wide, Glasner at Palace, also sort of attacking through the middle that way as well. That's been speculated on. But, and I'll probably pronounce his first name wrong, Eze. Crystal Palace, starter, another. They do have some production line, Ben, don't they? There's no two ways about it. Similar a little bit in terms of Olise, as in similar goals, similar assists, 17 goal contributions, a lot more minutes. So we talked about sample size. We got a big sample size for Eze to talk about. And naturally, he's headed to the Euros at the same time, isn't he, Ben, as well? So people will be looking at that one. I mean, stats-wise, because Premier League clubs are linked with him again, it seems to be Spurs and United, the two that are mentioned. Can you see why people are interested in Eze from how he's done in the Premier League this season?
Absolutely. I mean, if we're just looking at goals per 90, he's actually averaged 0.44 goals per 90. That's, if we're comparing it to someone of, the sort of top wingers in the Premier League, let's say, for example, Bukayo Saka, who I've compared him to, Saka has averaged 0.45. So that's a 0.01 0.01 difference between the two players. And based on that alone, that's obviously going to generate interest in him. However, I do have some question marks when it comes to his sort of creative numbers and his sort of overall output, because he's overperformed his XG. So he scored 11 in the Premier League, but his XG is only 8.6. It's not a huge performance, but it is quite significant. That I think raises some question mark. And he's got a relatively low expected assist as well. So out of wingers in the Premier League, he's just made it into the top 30, which is, obviously, I think of this, you have to put it into the context. He plays for Crystal Palace.
True.
For under Roy Hodgson for a significant chunk of the season. So I think the question mark there is, can he scale these sort of numbers, and can he be scaled in and be more attacking and more creative in obviously playing for a much more offensive team? And I think quite know that yet, but there is definitely potential there, and obviously he's had an impressive season, so that's bound to generate interest.
It's an interesting one again, because similarly, according to reports, the suggestions are there is a release clause there. It's an interesting one because apparently it's 60 million, but based on, according to a few reports, there's performance-related bonuses which will trigger on an extra 8 million. So you're talking possibly 68 in all honesty. Spurs United, as we said, the most heavily linked. Now, is the other concern possibly with Eze his age? What I mean by that is not saying he's an old player, but we know where clubs often like to pick up players of which age bracket, Ben. He is 25 now. By the end of this month, he will be 26, which tends to be in the nicest way, a bit older than clubs traditionally at the big, like to pick players up. Not that it's just one size fits all. Do you think that could count against him in terms of the fee and how clubs may look at him at all in any way?
Yeah. First of all, I take that question a little bit personally, having just turned 26 myself. But yeah, for a 26-year-old, that kind of figure is quite high. And I think that's why we're not seeing him linked with the big moves.
Yeah.
With all respect to Tottenham and Manchester United at the moment, they are not the sort of big guns or the teams who are known for necessarily always making the best decisions in terms of recruitment. So, I think he's one of those sort of Adam Lallana types who feels young. He's just made the England squad, so he can get a big move, but I don't think he can get like the top move. That's why some clubs who, if he was maybe, let's say, even 3 years younger or 4 years younger, that he could be on their radar, but because of that age, because of the transfer fee, he's sort of being cut off the shortlist, so to say. And I think that's why we're only seeing him being linked with the likes of Tottenham and United.
He's an interesting one, you're right. Like the age, it tends to be, if we're honest, above the profiles of the likes of an Arsenal, a City, even, a Liverpool would side. I know people will say about Declan Rice, but there was an understanding there. I'm not sure Eze comes into that bracket, a game-changing signing for a lot of these sides. That's not diminishing him in any way. That's just the nature of how it is. This is a tough question because when I'm going to ask you, what do you think is the best option for him? Obviously, he could have a good Euros, Ben. He could play a part, and that obviously changes the fee structure completely. The danger is then the other clubs are probably less attracted to him if the fee goes up even more, more prominent the release clause. If he has a good Euros, Palace will be saying, well, it's the release clause minimum because of this type of thing. You're right. You feel it's against the big club's age bracket, possibly is going to count against him. But at the same time, if he doesn't move now, it's going to be even harder when he's 27, isn't it? Next to get that sort of big move. What do you feel? And it is important to ask that or give that context and ask that question because Sesko, we said because of his age, stay. With Eze and what we're saying because of his age, where are you going with this?
It's a tough call because I think Tottenham have very similar sort of players there. Maddison, Brennan Johnson, those kind of players. So I don't know if he necessarily fits into that system. I could see him doing well under Postecoglou, but given the sort of competition for places there, I don't know if it's the smartest move. He is going to be 26, so he will want to make a big move. United potentially could be one of those where, I think they are kind of a little bit tired of Bruno Fernandes recently. And I could see him playing in that number 10 role in a new and evolved Manchester United. So I think that could be a smart move. But I'm not quite sure when does his contract expire? Is he on a long-term contract?
No, it seems to suggest he has got a few years as well. I don't know if this is right, but transfer market showing me till 2027. So so that's a long contract. If I were him, I would say if he was on maybe had 1 or 2 years after his contract, I'd be looking to move to Europe because I think right now, if you're looking at the top 6 clubs, not many of them need a number 10. And I profile him as a number 10. I know we're talking about wingers, but I see him as more of a number 10. So for me, because of that long-term contract, his best option right now, you want to get that big move, is United. And I think that's where he's going to play the most. That's where he has the sort of most chances to make a big name for himself. And as much as, United's recruitment has been questionable and you almost feel anxious when a talented player moves over there because they don't tend to fulfill their potential. I think Eze's got that ability to make a name for himself there. And with Ten Hag's football, the pressing side of things, I think he could suit that style of play as well. Will be interesting to see. Yeah, like I said, he actually only did his extension in November last year, so he only signed a new contract, which means that's why there's a release clause. And you can't imagine, because of that, Crystal Palace wanting to bend on that in any way at all. I have got, this could be wrong and time will tell, I've got the sneaking suspicion he could almost be their new Will Sahar, i.e. where other people go. It would not surprise me if Eze is at Palace at the start of next season and maybe look at his options. He has got a long-term contract there now as well. So, yeah, it does feel like now or never. We want to keep an eye on that Eze for Palace. We've talked Olise for Palace. And now we'll jump all over the place, Ben, because we'll talk about a winger who officially is a Newcastle player, just to be clear, but spent last season on loan at Feyenoord, Yakuba Minteh. So Gambian winger, 19 years old. If people are maybe not avid fans of the Eredivisie or world football, won't have known too much, but became prominent with that article, didn't they, in the Daily Telegraph and the Newcastle correspondent Luke Edwards, and there's been a few stories and even Sky Sports News, mainly around Newcastle like this kid. He's done well, but they've got FFP, PSR issues, as we know. It's affecting many clubs, so they prepare to cash in, and the fee's different, which we'll come to. Ben, I know you like this kid, though, quite a bit, Minteh. Do you think, like, Premier League clubs will be interested in this player, even Newcastle keeping him at the same time?
Yeah, I think he's got a lot of potential. He sort of came on my radar a few years ago, really just burst onto the scene at Odense in I think Odense is a Danish, or
yeah,
I think it's a Danish club. Yeah. So I sort of flagged him up because of his Y Scout numbers. Started watching games of his, and he was very raw at the time, and but you could tell he very talented. Had a lot of potential, and I've been really impressed by his sort of development since. He's had a difficult start to his sort of season at Feyenoord. He wasn't a regular, but he just continued working hard and continued developing throughout his time at the club. And by the end of it, he was doing what he was doing in the Danish Superliga, and just beating players for fun and scoring goals and getting assists for fun as well. So I think towards, like, in his last 11 games, he scored he got around 10 goal contributions. Mm. So that was really impressive to see. And I think just in general, he's developed a lot. If we're looking at his XG output, 0.61 per 90. On top of that, 0.27 expected assists per 90. Those are really high numbers, and the kind of numbers that top clubs are going to be looking at. For me as well, just his... I profiled him. I think this is a lazy profile because a lot of players coming from Africa get labelled as the next Sadio Mane and stuff like that, and I don't think that's fair. But he's definitely got elements of Mane in him. He's a very fast winger, very good in 1-versus-1 situations, loves to run at defenders, has a lot of energy. For reference, last season in the Eredivisie, he recorded the second top speed in the entire league. And also, I think he ranked top 5 among the attackers for highest sprint distance. He also averaged the most progressive runs. And I think if you're looking at, for example, his FBref profile, he ranks in the 99th percentile for tackles in the final third. So that gives you a little taste of the kind of player that he is. He's explosive, lots of energy, but at the same time, he's got that output as well to back it up. And I think that's what you sometimes don't see in players as young as himself, or players playing in these sort of... I think the Eredivisie is still a relatively strong competition. You don't quite see that. So the fact that he's got the running numbers, the dribbling numbers, the pressing numbers, and on top of that, he's got the output, that will make him a bit of a gem in this market. And I think for Newcastle, he's almost a commodity because they've got Anthony Gordon, who's obviously a very similar type of profile, maybe they don't necessarily need a Minteh, and they don't have the time to integrate him into the team. So I understand why they would want to sort of get them off their hands.
Yeah, I mean, the report said there's a lot of clubs interested. Liverpool was named checked as one. It's interesting how quick the fee came down, Ben, because it was 40 million that Daily Telegraph, and then overnight it became 25 million, and Sky Sports went with, Newcastle looking for somewhere around 25 million. In world terms, it's a lot of money, but if it is a 25 million mark for a player with this potential, I know, like you said, a lot of it is paying for potential. Do you think clubs will be attracted at that marker, 20? Because 40 seems very steep, but 25 million seems, would it bring others to the party?
I think in this day and age, even 35 is a relatively decent price with maybe 30 with add-ons of 5 million. I think that even that is a good price for him, because I do see a lot of potential in him. I think at that 20-25 million range, it becomes almost a no-brainer, especially if you're a club like Liverpool who can afford it. Obviously, other clubs maybe they cannot afford to make a 20-25 million risk, but Liverpool's got the financials to sort of be able to do that. And I think, given how stylistically he suits Liverpool's system in terms of having high pressing numbers, having that energy, having that ability to beat players 1-versus-1, being so explosive, and also having a record of putting his chances away. I think for all of those reasons it makes sense. And then on top of that, you calculate the fact that he's worked with Arne Slot. Arne Slot has already spoken highly of him. He's obviously done a great job in developing him already. So for his development as well, it would be probably a good sort of move to work on someone who already knows him and make that next step in his career.
Yeah, we'll be interested to see whether we know Slot's situation at Liverpool, that he's not ultimately the bottom line in charge of transfers. Does that link hold weight? I suppose we ask this for every player, but we think about what would be the best course of action for Minteh. I mean, Liverpool could be an option, and some of the patch journalists there have ruled it out, but then again, that noise is still there. Staying at Newcastle, although I kind of get the impression they would keep him if FFP wasn't in sort of their question marks, and then you start to think about, well, what about the likes of Almiron, Callum Wilson, and their other targets? But then again, I suppose the option is, because of how he did at Feyenoord and that slow start, does Minteh need football, first-team football, more than anything, even a bigger club? What would you be advising for this kid?
Well, if the Liverpool interest is genuine, I think he'd be smart to make that move, because I think even if he were to stay at Newcastle, he might actually be guaranteed a better development pathway at Liverpool, where there is a manager who knows him, where the club plays a playing style, a system that suits him, and where there is a Mohamed Salah who is sort of running to the end of his contract as a Liverpool player, and there are question marks for how long he will be at the club. Obviously, that's in Minteh's position, and there's not a lot of other right wingers at Liverpool who are sort of ready to come into the first team or could play there. So I think if that interest was genuine, I would advise him to make that move. However, if it's not, then certainly I think it doesn't seem like Newcastle are keen, and I think he needs regular minutes. He'll want to continue his development. So maybe, looking elsewhere in the Premier League at a club that is looking for a player of that profile, or even looking at maybe one of the sort of stronger leagues like a Serie A or a La Liga type of club. I think that could suit him as well. I think it's important that he probably stays playing in Europe as well, just because obviously he'll want to continue staying at the highest level. So any club who's sort of competing in a European competition in the La Liga or the Bundesliga or Serie A, I think that would be the sort of smartest choice away from Liverpool, or alternatively, a sort of mid-table Premier League side where he can integrate to English football and sort of show what he's about and gradually make that step up to Newcastle.
Yeah, it will be interesting. You do feel whatever he does, he needs to have that clear pathway, and he needs to make sure he knows he's going to play, get those minutes, if that development is going to continue. Will be an interesting one to see if he does get sacrificed. It's probably right to say by Newcastle, with FFP being an issue for them. And speaking of teams in a different league, but with financial issues, Leeds obviously lost the playoff final then. We know what that means. There were all of a sudden, there's the stories of Leeds need to raise 100 million through sales, blah, 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 all the different things. The one name that even before this has been linked with a move, Summerville, their Dutch winger, 22, went soon to be 23. Plays from the left, Championship Player of the Year as well. You know, good number of goals, good number of assists. Chelsea and Liverpool have been linked with the player. There's been a lot more, I sort of think, playing down of reports for Liverpool. But if you look at certain reports like Romano saying, no, Liverpool is still very much interested. Depends obviously what you want to take from that, people. Ben, this is a player that's done well in the Championship. So he's a Championship Player of the Year. So his stats could look good. How much are we reading into his stats from what you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, his sort of XG and expected assist number, they both individually rank him in the top 10 in the Championship. Overall, there are a few wingers in his position who have that sort of output in European football. So that is impressive alone, because there are a few players like him who are capable of recording both high XG and high expected assists. But like you mentioned, it is the Championship, and I think we've seen it before. Players have done well in the Championship and have not been able to make the step up to the Premier League, or if they did make the step up, the numbers significantly reduced in terms of their output. For me, I don't think he's extraordinary. I do think he's a very good player who has the potential to sort of make the next step in his career, and he definitely is good enough, I think, to play in the Premier League. It's just a question of how good is he, and where can he play? Is he ready for the kind of big move that is a Liverpool, or does he maybe need to make a move to a Southampton or Newcastle even? Or I doubt that is valid, because Newcastle already have a lot of wingers, so I don't think they'd be looking at him. But that kind of club, I think for me the answer is probably the latter. I don't think he's ready for a move to Liverpool just yet. I think if he were to move to Liverpool, it would be as a second choice, as a backup option. And I think he got to question, is that the best move for him at this stage of his career? I don't know. He isn't a teenager anymore, so he's, I think, 22 now. And I think at that age, you want to be playing regular football, and you want to be sort of the talisman at a club, rather than playing second fiddle.
Yeah, it's a tough one, like you say that, and I see so much Championship examples that Adam Wharton plays in a completely different position with more a defensive field, not an out-and-out defensive midfielder, but defensive field in the midfield. People that at the same time talk about Jared Bowen and how he came from Hull, but it did take him a few years to get there, didn't it? And sort of ramp up to the level of the Jared Bowen that we see now. Tends to be that the goal scorers don't always go straight away. And even people that use Ollie Watkins, he's taken Ollie Watkins' time. I mean, he's 29 now, isn't he, to get to this level? So I think you're right. It feels like there almost needs to be rather than jumping to a Chelsea or Liverpool, a stepping stone. Or maybe that's wrong or dismissive, but someone maybe a bit lower down to see. It almost felt like Crystal Palace, if one of the others was to leave, could be a great move for him in that regard. At the same time, Ben, 30 goal contributions in the Championship. Teams like Crystal Palace do specialise in, taking those Championship talents and making them the next level. The fee suggested by a lot is around the 30 million mark. Is it important, like you say, that you do believe it's right for him to make that Premier League step, whatever club's that at? It might not be one of the elite right at the top, but he qualifies enough based on his stats for 30 million, a decent investment for a lower end Premier League club.
I think so, absolutely. He's based on his numbers alone, he's outgrown the Championship. So I think it's a natural next step for him to make that move to the Premier League. 30 million does make him, I think, a relatively decent price. Like we're talking, especially based on the transfer fees that we're talking on this podcast, I think that makes him a bargain compared to the other players that we talked about. So I think if I was a sort of mid-table Premier League club, he'd 100% be on my radar. If I was looking for a winger, he'd be actually top of my shortlist, I think. And I think it would be a smart move. It doesn't come with too many risks. He's still relatively young, so I think he'll maintain his resale value. And I think overall it would just be a good move for any of those clubs, because you're getting a player, I think, who's ready to make the next step.
He's a tough one, isn't it? Wingers, we recommend that we suspect one will go. Eze, it feels like now or never. Minteh, pick your move carefully because you need football as well, be it that to Liverpool, wherever, you've got to have a path. Summerville, especially with Lee's financial plight, it feels like the time is now or never for him. And ladies and gents, that takes the end of the stroll through the Winger Wonderland we'd aimed for there. We talked about our thoughts, we brought the metrics into it. We will see what happens with all four on the market. I think it'll be a big surprise for me, Ben, and everyone if at least one of those does not have a new club come the end of the summer. So all it leaves me to do is say, as ever, Ben, for the insight, the time, much appreciated, mate.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, we'll be interested to see. And we'll be back with another one next week on EPL Market Metrics.
Sports Social Podcast Network.